When I arrived at my daughter Diana's memorial service, a man in a dark suit approached me before I even reached the entrance of the funeral home. I froze when he flashed an FBI badge and whispered something that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. But before I continue, I need you to know this story is real, and it happened to me just 6 months ago here in Seattle. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and write in the comments where you're watching this from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. I never imagined that at 68 years old I would be attending my daughter's funeral. Diana was only 40, a brilliant forensic accountant who spent her career uncovering financial fraud. They told me she died in a car accident on Interstate 5, her vehicle sliding off the rain-slicked road near Capitol Hill. The Seattle Police Department said it was instantaneous, no suffering, just gone. The wake at the Sunset Hills funeral home in Queen Anne was filled with people I didn't recognize. Diana's colleagues, clients, faces that meant nothing to me in my grief. I sat in the front row, numb, staring at the closed casket draped with white lilies. My son Julian stood at the podium, delivering a eulogy that would have moved anyone who didn't know him as I did. Julian was 42, a successful real estate developer with offices in Pioneer Square. He and his wife Victoria had been managing the funeral arrangements with an efficiency that should have comforted me, but instead left me with an unsettling feeling I couldn't name. They'd handled everything. The funeral home, the flowers, the catering, even the obituary in the Seattle Times. During the wake, I noticed Julian's hand constantly on Victoria's lower back, guiding her, controlling her movements. She smiled at guests, but her eyes were hollow, distant. When she handed me a glass of water with 2 pills, I hesitated. "For your nerves, Eleanor," she said softly, using my first name as she always did, never calling me Mom despite 15 years of marriage to my son. "Doctor Morrison prescribed them after Diana's accident. You've been so forgetful lately, and this stress can't be helping." Dr. Morrison. I didn't recall visiting any Dr. Morrison. But then again, the past weeks had been such a blur of grief and confusion. I took the pills, swallowing them down without question, just as I had been doing for months. The funeral itself was a fog. I remember standing at Diana's gravesite in Crown Hill Cemetery, watching as they lowered the casket into the wet Seattle earth. The rain was relentless, appropriate for mourning but making everything harder. Julian held an umbrella over me, his other hand gripping Victoria's arm perhaps a bit too tightly. After everyone had left, after we'd returned to my house in Queen Anne, that's when Julian brought out the papers. We were sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made breakfast for my children for decades, where Diana had done her homework at this very table. "Mom," Julian said, spreading documents across the oak surface, "we need to talk about practical matters. This house is too much for you to manage alone, especially now." I looked at him, at his perfectly styled hair and expensive suit, and felt a wave of exhaustion. "Julian, we just buried your sister. Can this wait?" "That's exactly why we can't wait," Victoria interjected, her voice gentle but insistent. "Tragedy reminds us how fragile life is. We need to make sure you're taken care of. Julian and I have been looking at some wonderful senior living communities. There's one in Ballard with views of Puget Sound." "Senior living?" The words felt foreign, offensive somehow. "I'm 68, not decrepit." Julian sighed, the patient sound of someone dealing with a difficult child. "No one's saying you're decrepit, Mom. But you have to admit, your memory hasn't been what it used to be. Last week you called me 3 times asking if I'd heard from Diana. You'd forgotten about the accident. Had I done that? I couldn't remember. The pills Victoria gave me made everything so hazy. We've already found a buyer for the house," Julian continued, pulling out more papers. "He's willing to pay well above market value, but we need to move quickly. Real estate in Queen Anne is competitive." I stared at the papers, at what looked like my signature already on some of them, though I had no memory of signing anything. "I haven't agreed to sell." "Mom," Victoria said, reaching across the table to pat my hand, "we discussed this last week. You were very clear about wanting to downsize. Don't you remember?" I didn't. But then again, what did I remember clearly anymore? That night, after they'd finally left, I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at the pill bottles on my nightstand. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, but I couldn't grasp what it was. The fog in my mind was thick, impenetrable. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Special Agent Marcus Cole with the FBI. Please don't react, don't make any noise. Is anyone else in the house with you? My heart started racing. No, I whispered, moving to lock my bedroom door. What's happening? Is this about Diana? Ma'am, I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. Your daughter Diana is alive. The room spun. I sat down hard on my bed. The phone pressed so tightly to my ear it hurt. That's impossible. I was at her funeral today. I watched them bury her. You watched them bury a Jane Doe who died in a separate accident, someone we'd been trying to identify for weeks. Mrs. Hayes, your daughter came to us 4 months ago. She'd uncovered a massive money laundering operation while auditing accounts for one of her clients. The trail led her somewhere she never expected, to your son Julian. No, I breathed. Julian is a real estate developer. He's successful. He wouldn't. He's using your name, your social security number, your credit to purchase properties that are then used to wash money for a criminal organization operating out of Vancouver. Diana found documents showing he's forged your signature on over 30 property deeds in the past 2 years. The total value exceeds $12 million. My mind reeled. The signatures on the papers tonight. The conversations I supposedly didn't remember. The pills, I said suddenly. Victoria's been giving me pills. For my memory, she said. We know. Diana suspected they were drugging you. We had samples tested from your bathroom last month. Benzodiazepines in doses high enough to cause significant cognitive impairment and memory loss. They've been making you compliant, confused, so they could use your identity without resistance. I felt sick. Where's Diana? Why did she fake her death? Because Julian found out she was investigating him. We received credible threats on her life. The only way to keep her safe and continue the investigation was to make Julian think the threat was neutralized. Mrs. Hayes, we need your help. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? It's critical that Julian doesn't know you've spoken to us. The next morning, I told Julian I needed to buy groceries. He offered to come with me, but I insisted I needed time alone to clear my head. The fog from the pills was starting to lift, and I was seeing things with brutal clarity. The FBI field office in downtown Seattle was a grey building I'd passed 1,000 times without thinking. Agent Cole met me in a conference room on the 7th floor, and there, sitting at the table with her hair dyed dark brown and wearing glasses I'd never seen before, was Diana. Mom, she said, standing up, her voice breaking. I couldn't speak. I just held her, this daughter I'd mourned, this child who was alive and warm and real in my arms. We stayed like that for a long time, both of us crying. When we finally sat down, Diana explained everything. I was doing a routine audit for Pacific Northwest Developments, one of Julian's shell companies, though I didn't know it at the time. I found irregularities, cash deposits that didn't match property sales, buyers who didn't exist. When I dug deeper, I found your name everywhere, Mom. Your signature, your credit, your identity being used to hide money from a drug trafficking operation. I confronted Julian privately, she continued, her voice shaking. I thought maybe he'd been coerced, that we could fix it together. He laughed at me. Said you were so out of it on the pills Victoria gave you that you'd sign anything. He said if I told anyone he'd claim you had dementia and had been running the scheme yourself. He'd let you take the fall. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Why would he do this? Agent Cole pulled out a thick file. Your son has a gambling addiction, Mrs. Hayes. He's been laundering money for the Zhao organization out of Vancouver for 3 years. They threatened his life when he couldn't pay his debts. He started small, using his real estate business legitimately. But when he needed more, he turned to you. Victoria is complicit, we have evidence. She's the one who's been administering the drugs and forging your signatures on the most critical documents. Over the next week, I lived the strangest double life. During the day, I played the grieving, confused mother. I let Julian and Victoria come to my house, let them bring their papers and their pills. But I didn't take the medication anymore. I'd flush it down the toilet when they weren't looking. And slowly, hour by hour, my mind cleared. I saw things I'd missed. The way Julian's eyes would flicker to Victoria before answering any of my questions. The bruise on Victoria's wrist when her sleeve rode up. The way she flinched when he touched her. She wasn't just complicit. She was trapped. One afternoon, while Julian was out showing a property, I found myself alone with Victoria in my kitchen. She was preparing my medication when I said, quietly, "I know about the drugs." She froze, her hand hovering over the pill bottles. The colour drained from her face. "Eleanor, I don't know what you... And I know about the money laundering, the forged signatures, all of it." Victoria's hand started shaking. She sank into a chair, and for the first time since I'd known her, the careful mask she wore cracked completely. "He'll kill me if he finds out, you know," she whispered. "He's already threatened to. The bruises." She pulled up her sleeve, showing purple and yellow marks all along her arm. "This is what happens when I question him. Victoria, the FBI knows everything. Diana's alive. She's been working with them." Victoria's eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears. "Diana's alive? But we saw Julian arranged everything. He said it was handled. He thought it was. But Diana's smarter than both of us gave her credit for." I reached across the table, taking Victoria's trembling hand. "You don't have to protect him. They can help you." What I didn't know then was that Victoria had been carrying a burden much heavier than I imagined. She'd been documenting everything. Every beating. Every forged signature she'd been forced to create. Every transaction. She'd been Julian's prisoner for 2 years, but she'd also been collecting evidence, waiting for a chance to escape. The next day, she turned herself into Agent Cole. The FBI gave her immunity in exchange for testimony. She wore a wire the following week when Julian discussed the next phase of his plan, having me declared legally incompetent so he could sell my house and liquidate my retirement accounts to pay off his debts. The recording was damning. Julian's voice, casual and cold, explaining to Victoria exactly how they'd get a psychiatrist he'd paid off to declare me unable to manage my affairs. How they'd move me into the cheapest care facility they could find. How they'd be free of me. On a grey Thursday morning, 6 weeks after Diana's staged funeral, FBI agents arrived at Julian's office in Pioneer Square. I was there, hidden in Agent Cole's car across the street, watching through the windshield. They led him out in handcuffs. His face was red with anger and disbelief. He saw the FBI vehicles, the agents, and his eyes searched wildly until they found me standing on the sidewalk with Diana beside me. The shock on his face was something I'll never forget. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, he had. Then his expression twisted into rage. "You're supposed to be dead," he shouted at Diana. "I paid to have you." An agent cut him off, pushing him into the vehicle. But we'd all heard it. The confession. The admission that he'd done more than just found out about Diana's accident, he'd arranged it. The trial took 3 months. The evidence was overwhelming. 37 counts of identity theft, fraud, money laundering, and most serious of all, conspiracy to commit murder. Diana had been the target of a hit that had thankfully missed its mark, killing someone else instead, a tragedy that had provided the cover for her disappearance. Victoria testified, her voice steady despite visible bruising on her neck from a final argument with Julian the night before his arrest. She described years of abuse, coercion, and fear. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. Julian was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The real estate empire he'd built on fraud and my stolen identity was dismantled. The properties were seized, sold, the money returned to victims and used as restitution. I should have felt only relief, only justice. But I also felt the deep, complicated grief of losing a son I'd loved, even if the person he'd become was a stranger. Diana and I sold my house in Queen Anne legitimately this time. We moved to Port Townsend, a small town on the Olympic Peninsula about an hour from Seattle. The Victorian house we found was smaller, cozier, overlooking the water. Diana set up a home office and continued her forensic accounting work remotely. I volunteered at the local library, finding peace in the smell of books and quiet. Victoria entered a witness protection program. The JOW organization had placed a price on her head for her testimony. Before she left, she came to say goodbye. "I'm sorry," she said, standing in my new living room, clutching a bag with everything she was allowed to take to her new life. "For all of it. I should have been stronger. I should have protected you. You were a victim too," I told her. "And in the end, you found your courage. That's what matters." She hugged me. This woman who'd poisoned me for 2 years, and I hugged her back. Because I understood, perhaps in a way that surprised even me, how people could make terrible choices when they were afraid, when they were trapped. 3 years passed. Diana married a kind man she met in Port Townsend, a boat builder named Sam. They bought a small house near mine. I became grandmother to a baby girl they named Eleanor after me. One spring afternoon, I received a letter from the federal prison in California where Julian was serving his sentence. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The letter was short. No excuses, no justifications, just an acknowledgement of what he'd done and the pain he'd caused. He wrote about the therapy he'd been receiving, the 12-step program for his gambling addiction, the way he'd finally had to face what he'd become. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote. "I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I remember who I used to be, before the addiction and the debt and the fear twisted me into someone capable of hurting his own mother. That person is ashamed. That person would give anything to undo what he's done." Diana found me on the back porch, the letter in my hands, tears on my cheeks. "Are you going to write back?" she asked, sitting beside me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to burn it and forget he exists." "Both feelings can be true," she said, taking my hand. "He's still my brother, even after everything. I hate him for what he did, but some small part of me remembers when we were kids, when he was different. That doesn't excuse anything. It just makes it more complicated." I did eventually write back. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to acknowledge that I'd received his letter. I told him about Diana's wedding, about the baby, about our new life. I told him that what he'd done had broken something that could never be fully repaired, but that I was building a new life from the pieces. His letters came every few months after that. I read them all. Sometimes I responded, sometimes I didn't. Diana never wanted to communicate with him, and I respected that. Her wounds were deeper, more direct. He tried to have her killed. Some betrayals were simply too large to bridge. Victoria called me once from her new location, her voice distorted through the protection program's secure line. She'd started over in some small town I'd never know the name of. She was working at a women's shelter, she said, helping other women escape abuse. It felt right, she said, like she was turning her suffering into something meaningful. 5 years after Julian's arrest, I stood on the beach near my home in Port Townsend, watching my granddaughter Eleanor chase seagulls across the sand. Diana and Sam were building a sandcastle, laughing at something I couldn't hear over the wind. This wasn't the family I'd imagined. My son was in prison. My daughter had faked her death. My daughter-in-law was in hiding. But it was my family, rebuilt from ashes and betrayal into something fragile but real. I thought about forgiveness often, whether it was something I owed, something I could achieve. In the end, I decided forgiveness wasn't a destination. It was a process, ongoing and incomplete. Some days I felt closer to it. Other days the anger and hurt were as fresh as they'd been the day I learned the truth. What I did find was acceptance. Acceptance that people were capable of terrible things. Acceptance that love and harm could exist in the same relationship. Acceptance that not every story has a neat, satisfying ending. A few months ago, Julian called me. His first parole hearing was coming up. He wanted to know if I'd consider attending, if I'd consider writing a letter to the board. I thought about it for a long time. I talked to Diana, who was vehemently opposed. I talked to my therapist, who asked me what I needed for my own healing. In the end, I told him I'd write the letter, but not the letter he wanted. I would tell the truth. About the drugs, the theft, the betrayal. About the woman I was before he manipulated me, and the woman I'd become after. About the granddaughter who would grow up knowing her uncle only through stories of who he'd been and who he'd become. Whether that would help or hurt his chances for parole, I didn't know, but it was honest, and honesty was all I had left to give him. The parole board denied his request. He would serve at least another 5 years before being eligible again. When I heard the news, I felt neither satisfaction nor disappointment, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice, like healing, took time. Last month, Diana and I took Eleanor to the Pike Place Market in Seattle. We walked past Julian's old office building in Pioneer Square, now housing a different business. I felt nothing looking at it. The building was just a building. The past was just the past. "Do you regret it?" Diana asked me as we watched Eleanor toss fish food to the seagulls at the waterfront. Coming back to Seattle, facing it all? I thought about the question. About the woman I'd been, confused and manipulated in my own home. About the woman I was now, clear-eyed and careful, but not broken. No, I said finally. I needed to know it couldn't hurt me anymore. That place, those memories, they're just geography now, just history. Some bridges burn completely, and that's okay. Not every relationship can be saved or should be. Not every betrayal can be forgiven. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is build a new life from the ruins of the old one, accepting that some doors close forever. I am 68 years old. My daughter faked her death to save my life. My son tried to steal my identity and my freedom. My daughter-in-law was both my poisoner and my unlikely ally. My story doesn't have a perfect ending. It has an honest one. And as I watch my granddaughter laugh on this Seattle waterfront, surrounded by the remnants and rebuilding of a family that survived the worst of itself, I realize that might be enough. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just survival, truth, and the small moments of joy we build in the aftermath. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Write in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Would you have written to your son? Would you have attended the parole hearing? These questions keep me up at night sometimes. Maybe they'll make you think too. This is Eleanor Hayes, and this is my story of betrayal, survival, and the complicated roads we walk when family becomes dangerous.